Thing.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I say, can you repeat what you were talking about?
Yeah, so I've had this habit pattern for a long time that basically when I need to make a decision, choose between two options, let's say at work or something, and it feels like the stakes are really high. I don't know which one to choose, and I keep going back and forth between two options, and this causes a lot of fear, doubt, and confusion. It's almost like terrorizing. So this pattern doesn't come up as often as, like, let's say liking or like disliking, but when it does, it's really strong. So yeah.
Okay. Yes. Um, there is that third kind of feeling, that feeling of confusion.
Hmm.
And unlike, um, you see, liking and unliking seem to be fairly easy for students to understand. But you're fortunate enough now that you can begin to see it. So now
Hmm.
let's get some basis of understanding for it. Um, the first thing to say is that this is an actual kind of feeling, and that it's neither a good feeling nor a let us say a bad feeling in the sense of rejection. There's not something
Yeah.
that you want to put away. It's that you don't know what to do.
Hmm.
All right. Psychologists have known about this a long time also, and that they've got their labels for it. But this is a strong feeling. Everyone has it. And that some people are so caught up in the decision making process that they've got to go through that they fail to recognize um, the push of that feeling that they've got to go through this.
Hmm. Yeah.
All right. This feeling can be called confusion, it can be called doubt. Um, it can be called a driver in the sense of one of the ways of talking about it is to be perfect, that you've got to make the right
Yeah.
decision.
Yeah.
All right. That making a mistake about this, let us say, is a kind of a killer because it kills your opinion of yourself if you make a mistake. And so you put yourself under enormous pressure, but that pressure was originally brought up through this Vedana, this feeling, and the feeling was slight. But look what you did to it. Just like you can say that, okay, well, not liking something um, is just a feeling. But for instance, if the young man has just gotten out of his KKK meeting where they're doing rah rah sis boom bah, let's kill all the Arabs, and then he sees a man in a turban and he goes berserk and kills him, and the man was only not even Arab, he wasn't Muslim, he was a Sikh, and Guru Nanu was kind of against Islam. But because of that mistake and because of the anger and the hatred that's built up, we make really crazy decisions and crazy mistakes because we're put under the pressure of those bad feelings.
Yeah.
Another one is it happens in sports, but it happens in many other places. And in fact, it really happens a lot to wealthy people when they're gaining wealth is because they have to succeed. If they don't succeed, if they don't make this business deal, if they don't cheat that other guy, then some doom is going to happen or whatever like that. So all three of these kind of feelings can be very, very influential, though the feelings themselves are small. They're like the trigger. You know, pulling the trigger of a gun is very small, and if the gun is taken apart and the trigger's just laying as one of those items out on the table, pulling on that trigger is nothing. Or you can put the gun back together and not load it and pull the trigger, and it means nothing. But when the conditions are right, then doing a very, very small thing like pulling a trigger or having a feeling can have enormous results. And that's basically what you're talking about is that you're beginning to recognize that underlying feeling that puts you in a state of almost panic.
Yeah, and like you said, it starts off very small. I've seen this before. It starts off very small, and like I'm like, okay, this is not a big deal, but it grows like a storm. And this like out of liking, disliking, or confusion like grows out of control. Is
It does. But congratulations, you're beginning to see that. So that means that if you can see this thing, then you have a better, let us say, a longer list of choices. Your choice list grows simply because you can see things that you didn't see before, almost like seeing choices that you didn't see before.
Mhm.
And you've already started working with the breath, so you know that when these feelings of confusion comes up, taking a deep breath
Yeah.
is a good idea. And by doing so, we go right through that little process of all these technical little details of anapanasati of that you have to remember to look. And then you looked and you saw, and what you saw was this feeling. And this feeling is not a pleasant feeling. It's not an unpleasant feeling, but it can drive you.
Hmm. Yeah.
But if you can see it, the sooner you see it, then the wiser your choices will be about it. And then you can take, let us say, a moment or so to remind yourself of the reality of the situation, because oftentimes the feelings that we have, the feelings of confusion, become the reality,
Hmm.
to where the real reality is not that. An example of this would be, can can this decision wait until I'm not in a panic about it? In other words,
Usually
I
it
don't,
can.
yeah, that we don't have to solve the problem right now because the feeling is there right now.
Yeah.
That here's the way to think about it is that in that moment when those feelings arise, now the feeling dominates that moment. And therefore, it's the feeling itself that needs to be dealt with directly rather than indirectly. All right. So, this feeling that arises um, is very much like anxiety. And I think that people will identify with anxiety. In fact, they're similar.
Hmm.
But when someone generally has anxiety about something, they become kind of confused in a way of, I feel this way because something is wrong and needs to be fixed. And I need to figure out what it is that needs to be fixed so I can go fix it. All right. Basically, what we're looking at then is we're taking an inside feeling and putting it on the outside. And now the mind is trying to figure out what the problem is and trying to figure out a solution, which means now we've gone into the past and into the future. Into the past means trying to figure out what the problem is. And then into the future is, what can I do to fix that problem? Thinking wrongly, the the mistaken thought is that if I can find out what it is that's wrong and fix it, then I will feel better about it. And so the story that I have about that is way back in ancient times, there was an old farmer that lived in a hovel, and he's sitting up at night with his oil lamp, and he feels anxiety. And so he tries to figure out what it is that he needs to do. And so he says, aha, I know what it is. I've got to go out and fix that fence. I know the fence is broken down. And if I don't fix that fence, either the ghost will get out or the wolf will get in. And so there he is out in the night, fixing that fence, spending the time and the hours and the work to find the stones and build it back up again. And then he goes back into the hovel and he sits down, and in his exhaustion, he begins to rest. And then guess what? The anxiety came back. That in fact, it wasn't the fence at all that was the source of the anxiety. That anxiety, in fact, was just an old habit.
Mm-hmm.
And that people live their lives trying to solve problems that really don't exist, but they have the feeling that there is a problem that needs to be solved. That in fact, you could say that anxiety is also that kind of confusion. And that confusion is I've got choices to make. What do I do? I'm not sure, etc., like that. And then we work ourselves up because we are demanding of ourselves to make the right choice, and we don't know what the right choice is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we put pressure on ourselves. Well, generally what happens is if there is not enough information to take an action, then the best thing to do is to not take the action or any action until you get more information. And one of the ways of getting more information is to observe what's happening with you in the body right now and recognize that this feeling of confusion that came up may in fact not need for you to do an action at all. That it's just a feeling that came up. That it didn't come up because of the, let us say, the event of somebody's asking you to do something, or that you see the stock market movement or whatever, and then you say, do I sell, do I buy? Whatever the situation is, that confused feeling that arises does not arise based solely on the event that occurred. That it arises because you're in the habit, each person of us is in a habit of having those kind of feelings when information arises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is not generally the task. It's not generally the chore that needs to be done one way or the other. It's generally just a feeling that arises that is being triggered by some sort of event. And in many cases, there's really no event at all. It's just that those feelings are triggered, maybe just with a thought, or maybe not even a thought. Maybe the thoughts that we're having are triggered by these feelings, because it goes both ways. That's what we begin to understand about the what we call the Satipatthana. Actually, it's the Patthana. It's the four foundations, and that is that the mind and the feelings are interconnected, because we're kind of a whole human being, and our thoughts affect our feelings, and our feelings affect our thoughts. And there's many stories that I can give you to show how that happens, and that it actually is so well known that it can often be manipulated. It happens so often that it can be manipulated. Here's an example. Whether it's martial arts or an intellectual competition like a chess game or anything like that, a debate, If you can get your opponent angry or upset, then you can have an advantage over him. And that this is so well known that it's part of the show in a they call it WWE, the World Federation of Wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And that before the fight, the two fighters get up and have a great big argument with each other, right? Well, now this is all kind of fake sports, entertainment sports. And so they know in advance who's going to say what. But the fans supposedly, through, let us say, suspension of disbelief, so that when they hear these two guys arguing with each other, they will start to pick up those feelings and emotions that that are expected. But sometimes it's very real. In fact, I was just talking to my good friend Tun from Estonia. He's an old man and it was in Eastern Europe, and so he knows the story exactly. And that is the story about in 1972, there was a very famous chess championship for the World Chess Championship between Boris Spassky and Bobby Fischer, an American.
Mm-hmm.
And Boris Spassky was just excellent, better, really, than Bobby Fischer. Now, Bobby Fischer was world class, but he had an edge, and that edge was that he knew enough about psychology that he was capable of distracting almost to the point of discombobulating Boris Spassky. One of the things that he would do is he would take a chess piece. You know that if you touch a chess piece, you've got to move it.
You have to move it, yeah.
And so what he would do is he would take that chess piece that he was not going to move, hover his hand over it just like this, and leave it there for a long time while he was studying the rest of the board. That meant that he was putting Spassky into defending about what that piece can do, where can it be moved, and Bobby Fischer had no intention of moving that piece. But that wasn't all. When it was Spassky's time to move, Bobby Fischer would stand up and walk around and sometimes even hover right behind him as if he were spying or looking over his shoulder. He didn't touch him. He was not breaking any rules, but he was doing things that was really disconcerting and throwing, because then Spassky is thinking about Bobby Fischer's face right here rather than thinking about the chessboard, you see? All right. So
Yeah.
we get distracted like that with feelings, and then it prevents us from being able to think correctly. And so the best thing for you to do is to recognize that while you're feeling these kinds of things, it's better not to make any choices right now. The better thing to do is to get this feeling dealt with. And then later we could go and do what needs to be done. And so if Spassky had been able to do some Anapanasati, I think he'd have won that chess championship.
Actually, with this feeling, I've tried that before, where I would just delay because I knew that I wasn't in the proper emotional state to make the decision. So then I would get out of the feeling, but then it would come back and get out and come back, and this went on for days.
Yes, and every time
Eventually,
it comes back, you can say, I see you coming back and I can deal with you. You learn to take the lion's position of the winner or the champion over those feelings.
yeah,
So that no matter how often it comes back, you can deal with it. That it, in fact, is going to come back often. And the reason that it's going to come back often is because you're beginning to deal with your feelings in a new way.
yeah, that's true. And since I'm not making a decision, it's pushing even harder, like the feeling.
Yes.
Uh,
Okay, now here's another point about that is because you're becoming mindful of these feelings, you're actually going to see them more often They may be there and you don't see it or you don't know it. That's how most people operate, is that you get themselves in that state of panic, and now they're putting all of their focus and all of their attention on solving the problem while that panic is pulling them down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And they're not paying any attention to it. They're paying attention to all of the other stuff they're doing and not recognizing that they're completely bound by the fact that that
Yeah.
anxiety has got them. All right. So now you're beginning to pay attention to that. That's the excellent part. But by paying attention to it, by noticing it, by putting it on your short list of things to be mindful of, that means that you're going to see it a whole lot more often than you used to.
Mm-hmm.
Don't despair. That's exactly the par for the course. It fits in exactly with the way that 10-day meditation retreats operate. And what I'm about to say is so well known that the retreat centers that have to deal with this, they take precautions in the way of speaking, changing things around, etc., like that. Because here's what happens: on the first day, every time the student sits down for meditation, his mind will wander away, and he'll catch it wandering away 4, 5, 6, 7 times during that meditation session on day one. On day two, he's catching it even more, but by day six, he is completely frustrated because he's catching it now 30, 40, 50, 60 times wandering away. And so we get frustrated because we think that the job to do is to watch the breath. Oh no, the real job is to remember to watch the breath.
Mm-hmm.
It's a completely different thing to do. When we say, oh, my job is to watch the breath, then every time I'm not watching the breath, that feels like a little failure. And so the students will say, oh, monkey mind, all this meditation is so difficult. But they're not doing the full course because they also need to change their attitude. And that attitude change is basically what we're talking about here is that it's marvelous, it's wonderful that I can catch that stuff so often.
Mm-hmm.
And so there you are again. I caught you again. That's the attitude that is useful to develop, because that immediately pulls you out of that feeling into the feeling of being a champion over that feeling. And so that's the way to practice. And taking that deep breath is exactly what you're doing. So you're doing the right thing, but the extra ingredient is that part of gladdening the mind. Aha, I can see you. I can see you, Mr. Feeling, that feeling of confusion, that feeling of anxiety, that feeling of I don't know what to do right now. And so I actually do know what to do right now. Take a deep breath and feel happy that I am not being, let us say, forced to behave the way that I used to feel forced to behave because I had a certain feeling. This is wisdom at the point of contact. This is what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about. That's why in the study of Paticca Samuppada, which is dependent origination, I generally will eventually tell each student the entire little sequence of events, but it's best to introduce it in those points that are most useful for the student right away, to understand that we have a foundation, and that foundation is the body, the mind, the feelings, and the mind can be broken down into consciousness, into perception, into memory systems. And the most important quality of this memory system is that it is emotional more than intellectual. And you know that how sophisticated your verbal or intellectual memory system is. That we have all of these hundreds of concepts and all these thousands of words that we have and all of this language that we know. Well, our feeling system is just as complicated as that. And it's occurring almost all the time coming out of the reptilian brain. And the reptilian part of the brain, the anterior cortex, through the pineal and the pituitary glands, cause the adrenaline gland to pump out adrenaline and cortisone and all of those kind of chemicals that have to do with protection.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now the boxer might need those things in a martial arts. That's okay. But Boris Spassky does not need to be in that tense anxiety state, full of adrenaline and all pumped up, when he should be in a very quiet, selective mode, thinking about that chessboard if he's going to win. There is one game that is surprising. I think it's only 27 moves. And that they keep talking about how brilliant that game was of Bobby Fischer's. And the real interesting point is no, it was how stupid Boris Spassky was to let Bobby Fischer do that to him. So, this is what we need to do. We need to stand on guard in general, but the best place to stand on guard is when we're in a state of complete satisfaction. When we're sitting in a state of satisfaction, in joy, in confidence, in comfortableness, rocking along, and then the anxiety or the confused feeling comes up, we can see it easily. Mm-hmm. With the idea that you're not going to pull me out of my state of feeling good. The other option is that you weren't quite up to it and you saw it, and then it starts to pull you into it. And now you've got to get out of it. And the way to do that is whenever you see it, never mind how far along this whole process is gone, you will eventually wake up to it. And when you wake up to it, that's sati. And you will see what's going on. And then you'll say, okay, finish with that. I'm not going to let that feeling run this show. I'm going to take a deep breath and feel really good. And then we can deal with the task at hand. So the breathing becomes... Go ahead.
Earlier this week, I was feeling good and... some worries and stuff were coming up from work, but I actually for the first time probably I actually sidestepped it. It felt like it was pulling me in, but I'm like no, this is dangerous. I don't want to go into it, and I was actually able to just not go into it basically, and that felt really liberating.
Yes, absolutely. And it builds confidence. If you know, because you can see it, you did it that time.
Yeah.
You knowing that if you can do it once, you can do it a second time and a third. And then you'll come to the position that, hey, no matter how many times that feeling comes back, no matter how strong it is, no matter what thoughts are associated with it, I can come out of it. I can throw that hindrance out of the mind. I can throw that feeling out of the system by taking a few deep breaths, telling myself I can do this, telling myself I saw that feeling. We can now breathe it out, breathe it away. And so we're changing our mental attitude to the mental attitude of a winner, because before you were feeling like a loser. In other words, it was driving you to action. Now it can't drive you to action. That in fact is what is driving you to, if anything, is to look at it.
And it usually starts off with thoughts, and the feelings then come after. But if you can see the thoughts and just dodge them, then the feelings don't arise, is what I found. And yeah.
Yes, the thoughts are often a trigger for feelings. And sometimes the feelings are triggered and then the thoughts occur. That sometimes the feeling, as it's coming up, the thoughts start to stirring around it. Then we see the thoughts and we think the thoughts caused the feeling, where in fact it was the feeling that caused the thoughts. We don't really know that relationship until we get really fast at it. What I mean fast is in the sense of sati comes quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can begin to see, oh, well, and in fact, it doesn't even matter which came first, the thought
Yeah.
or the feeling.
Yeah.
What really comes, what the important thing that comes is the sati, the waking up to it, and then the right effort to come out of it that leads to the right attitude of, we can do this every time. Every time I get into this state, I can come right back out of it. All I need is the tools that are being developed right now. And so, as you develop the tools, confidence will build. The word in Pali is called shraddha, and that is often translated as faith. But faith, especially the kind of faith that has no evidence at all, doesn't. This is not. That's
Yeah.
not the kind of faith. Now, some people, especially beginning meditators, will say, "Well, shraddha does mean faith because I had to have some faith in order to start meditating." Oh no, you already had a lot of information. You already had information. You already started to build the confidence. And if you hadn't started to build the confidence, then you wouldn't have sat down to meditate. So there was already that spark of shraddha just to get started. That this is not blind faith. This is evidential. You've got your own evidence. I can see it by the smile on your face that you've got it. You can see it.
Yeah, like I had like a couple of days straight where I was just I was feeling like really good, and like once I see that, I don't feel like going back into the stuff. Uh so yeah, but I do eventually get pulled back into it, but it's got to keep coming out. Yeah.
Yes, and then you can come right back out of it. You can do this. That's that confidence that grows, and it grows through in actually in anapanasati, these things are laid out step by step, except that we don't take it. The problem is that we describe it step by step, but then it happens in a different kind of order than the way that it was taught. And the way that it's taught is organized so that the student can understand it better. So we talk about the body first, and then we talk about the feelings and the mind, and then the mind's objects. And so if the student practices that way, he'll make very little progress because things don't happen that way. Things
Yeah.
happen the way of sati comes first. You have to remember to start to practice. Well, that remembrance is actually step 9 of anapanasati. Step 9 is the experiencing of the mind. In other words, you experience the mind in the sense that it's wandered away from the breath, or you're experiencing the mind in the sense that this feeling of confusion and the thoughts associated with it is what's in the mind. And you can see that as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to letting it happen and not look at it. So you're actually not just experiencing the feelings and the thoughts, you're experiencing the mind that is creating those thoughts and feelings. And that mind system can be changed. And so step 10 of anapanasati is then immediately gladden that mind. Say, aha, I caught you. I experienced that anxiety. I experienced that confusion. I experienced those thoughts. And by gladdening the mind immediately, you've chased them already out. At least the thoughts are out. Maybe the residuals of the feelings are still there, and that's when the breathing comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And so then step number 1 and 2, we do that. And when we do that, we also begin to have the attitude change. Now, these are skills to be developed, but the skill of piti is often the most difficult skill for students to develop. And that's step 5 of anapanasati, but it's also the very first aspect of vedana. Because the first 4 steps of anapanasati is just dealing with the body. And it is possible by dwelling on thinking that you're just doing the four first steps of Anapanasati, but you somehow bring the others in, not magically, but they just sort of slide into place. Then you can say that, well, I don't need step 9 of Anapanasati, I just need to watch the breath. But in fact, you did do step 9 of Anapanasati, you remembered to watch the breath.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next one would be then to experience the whole body. Well, we still have to remember to experience it, but to paying close attention to the body and then relaxing the body. Well, unfortunately, just experiencing the body doesn't do all of the relaxation that is needed, that we need to do some feeling work. In other words, the body is not going to fully relax if the mind is tense,
Mm-hmm.
that this is all working together. And so this feeling of success, once we feel success and satisfaction, only then will the body actually come to relax. It's almost like that you heard a noise, you get on alert, what was that? Then you see what the noise was, you recognize that it's not dangerous, and now you can relax. You can't just say, oh, relax, I heard a noise, but I don't know what it was. It might be dangerous, but I can relax anyway.
No, you can't, right?
Uh,
Yeah.
all right, so these things have to work and fit together. It's just, in fact, it's just one practice, but we describe it in one way, and then it's to be practiced in another way. The same thing is true about Paticca Samuppada, that we teach it in forward order. In other words, this causes that, causes this, causes that. But then when we practice through Anapanasati, the Paticca Samuppada, we start backwards and go in reverse order because of the timing. Oh, I can see this now. I've got the skills. And now I've got the skills to see this part of it. And now I've got the skills to see this. All right. And so even though we discuss it and talk about it in forward order, it's to be practiced in reverse order. Anapanasati is even more complicated. And one of the most difficult to develop is this quality that's called piti, and is wrongly translated as rapture. And what we really want to look at is that this piti is actually the feeling of success. It's the feeling of being a winner. It's the feeling of I can do this. It's the feeling of aha, I caught you. But it's not the thought of gladdening the mind of aha, I caught you. It's the feeling of aha, I caught you. And by giving yourself the thought of aha, I caught you, you can develop the feeling of aha, I caught you. And that feeling needs to be developed. It's a skill. It's a skill to feel like a champion. Most bullies don't. They actually pretend to be a strong, tough dude because, in fact, they do feel weak inside. That often bullying is, let us call it a rebellion against authority figures. It's an authority issue. And it fits into the pecking order. These people pick on these people, and these people can't pick back, so they pick on someone lower than them. But everyone along that chain is victim. In TA, they have the story that the big boss tells the little boss, blah, blah, blah. The little boss says, yes, sir. He turns to one of his employees and says, blah, blah, blah. That little employee then tells the janitor, blah, blah, blah. The janitor goes home and he tells his wife, blah, blah, blah. The wife tells her kid, blah, 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 and the kid kicks the dog. But more than likely, that big boss said blah, 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 because he was feeling exactly the same way that you were feeling. So he was also a victim of his own feelings. But we're going to change that. We're going to intentionally change that. We're going to recognize that you're not a victim. So you've been playing the role of a victim your whole life. Every time you remember to see that you're playing victim, you can say, never mind, I'm coming out of that. I'm the champion here. I am not the victim of my own feelings. I'm not the victim of this pecking order. And so this is what we mean by rapture, and that the key word in English would be success. Because that's a feeling of success. And that feeling of success is, in fact, what drives humanity. It's the number one feeling. The feeling of success, for instance, of getting what we have wanted that we didn't have. So, but we understand also that wanting something that we don't have or wanting something that we can't have is suffering. So, in fact, getting what we want, the success of getting what we want is actually just the relief of the suffering of not getting it. And this is one of the reasons why people strive and work so hard, is because they're wanting to get rid of the feeling of dukkha, of not getting what they want, with the idea that they can gain success by getting what they want. And then that feeling of success is the anti-dukkha. That in fact, dukkha, the word do in there is a not, just like atta and anatta. But actually, atta is not ta. And so it's a double negative. Anatta is a double negative. Dukkha also has that quality, that it's a negative. You've probably heard of the three characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta.
Anatta, yeah.
Okay. Well, guess what? They can't possibly be characteristics because of them is a not permanent, not satisfactory, and not eternal or not self.
Mm-hmm.
Those are not characteristics. Those are anti-characteristics. The characteristic would be
That's
permanent.
true.
The characteristic would be satisfaction. The characteristic would be self. But there's not a self. And there's not satisfaction because there is no permanency. They can call them characteristics if they like. That's what I mean. That's the same thing as like using the word dukkha and using and saying the English language word suffering when they're not related.
Yeah.
Suffering is when someone is suffering, everybody knows it. But dukkha can be very, very subtle, and the subtleness is just not satisfying. So wanting something we won't have is not satisfying. Therefore, getting what we have wanted then becomes satisfying. But for most people, it doesn't last. I mean, even if it was a lottery, if you were announced on the radio, you heard that you just won $10 million in the lottery, everyone gets very exuberant. They get very happy. But that happiness doesn't last. In fact, the happiness disappears probably before the money actually arrives. The thought of $10 million is marvelous. Actual $10 million is now I've got a whole new set of friends I didn't have. I've got relatives I didn't know. I'm in the loan business, whether I want to be or not. And here comes the tax man, and I've got to hide and shelter what I've got because I'm clinging to it. And now all of a sudden, it's a curse. That huge amount of money is more a curse than it is a blessing. And yet the people who were very wealthy, they don't see it as a curse because they're not looking closely. This is what Jesus would say, would mean when he was said, it's easier for the camel to get to the eye of the needle than it is for a rich man to get into heaven. Why? Because the rich man will not turn loose of all of the stuff that camel is carrying. That in fact, they have found out that what this was, the eye of the needle, is actually a back door to the walled temple, the walled area of Jerusalem, and that it's a back door that has a very, very low ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
and that the men can walk through by ducking through it. It's narrow, but a camel cannot get in through there if it's loaded down. That the camel has to be unloaded, and then the camel can make it through, and then the men have to carry the goods in.
Mm.
All right, and so that's what is meant by that. That the camel cannot get through the eye of the needle when it's loaded down with wealth. Well, you can see that in your. We do that all the time. We think about what we've got. Is it needs to be preserved? It needs to be kept. You can't leave your cell phone out in the rain or in the
Yeah.
toilet because it'll get ruined very quickly. And so, Anisha, right? And so, if we've got a cell phone, that means now we've got a job to protect it. Well, the more cell phones or the more laptops or the more money someone has, then that means there's more work to be done to take care and preserve. And so it's better to go around empty-handed. If you've seen waiters that are really highly trained in beer gardens and whatnot like that, to where they can carry with one hand, they can carry 5 jugs of beer. And then on that arm, they've got a plate of food here, a plate of food here, and then they've got another one that they can pick up this way, and they can carry 3 plates of food and 5 beers at one time. But any little thing will cause that person to drop everything.
Yeah.
But if you've got even one thing in your hand, not being mindful, like car keys, people drop, they've only got one thing in their hand, the car keys, and they drop them. They've only got one thing in their hand, the cell phone, and they drop them. People have gone around looking for their eyeglasses while they're wearing them.
Yeah.
Some people will go around looking for their keys while they've got them in their hand. All right, in that regard, the fewer things that we have to deal with, then the less anxiety there's going to be about taking care of things. So the rich man, in fact, is overly burdened because, in fact, we have all of this stuff for security reasons. That the very first time that the human being, in the process of becoming human, so they say, apes can use tools. But one of the qualities of the apes is that when they finish with the tool, like using a grass reed to put down a hole to get a worm to start clawing on that grass reed and then pull it out, once the monkey or the ape gets the worm, he throws the grass leaf away. He doesn't keep his tools. But humans, one of the things that make us human is that we grab hold of our tools and we hold them and we keep them. You can see the first time that the wolves or the dogs or the cats left a carcass with so little meat on it that the only thing that was left was the marrow of the bone. And so the human will come around with a rock and start beating on that bone to crack it open to get the marrow out, right? But then a change is made. He likes this stone, and so he starts to carry it around. Maybe
it's his stone.
It's his stone. Exactly. And so the next thing is that we tie a stick to that stone, creating an axe. Fast forward, and now it's a cell phone or a musical instrument. They even call a musical instrument. It's common to call your guitar an axe. Some people even use the guitar as an axe on the stage. So that's the story, is that we grab hold of material goods. And the reason that we do it because it's useful and it is protective. We do it in the service of the self-preservation. That this stone helped me eat and preserve my life that day when I was able to crack a bone open with it. This is a magical stone. I've got to keep it. This is my stone. I can use it anytime I want to. Well, next thing you know, he's got another stone or maybe a third. And now he's got to figure out how to carry 3 stones.
Yeah.
So that is the birth of materialism. And that the Buddha talks about it, the words that are used are translated into sensual desire or sensual pleasures or sensual objects. But the word here, sensual, is actually meaning according to the senses. That is not necessarily sexual, though sexuality is a small part of sensuality. In fact, it's a very big part of it, but the sensuality that we're talking about that is so dangerous is all the things that we do and own so that we can turn that sensuality into sexuality. How many automobiles in the United States over the past 50 years have been purchased with the thought of it being a chick magnet?
Yeah.
How much makeup has been sold with the idea I'm not beautiful enough?
Mhm.
So this much of our material possessions is in service for sexuality, but most of the items that we use, most of the tools are directly for self-preservation and self-aggrandizement that has nothing really to do with sexuality at all. And so we become materialistic. And the more materialism that we have and cling to, then the more suffering we're going to have, because everything that we hold and own and claim as mine, we're going to lose it. That the handle will come off of the axe. The battery will go dead on the cell phone, or it'll burn the cell phone up in some cases. But the cell phone and the battery are temporary, and we're going to lose it. So the point is that, okay, it's all right to have a cell phone, just don't get attached to it, because you're going to lose it. Everything is temporary. Everything is temporary. So don't get caught into wanting things that you don't have and then clinging to those things once you get them, because the clinging to the item you already have does not give you the feeling of success. Getting something new that you didn't have before that you wanted, that's where the feeling of success comes in. Maintaining your fortune is only pain and suffering. Getting that fortune, that was the big whoopee moment. Knowing that, and knowing that these feelings can be, with skill, managed and contained, and also, let us say, inflated or developed, is by deciding which feelings that we want to develop and which feelings we want to abandon. And so mostly the kinds of feelings that people have throughout their whole lives is the kind of feelings that if they were wise, they would choose to abandon. But we have those feelings anyway because we're in the habit of them, and we have those feelings mindlessly.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the primary feelings that we have has to do with go along to get along. Going along to get along, which means that I'll do it, but I don't like it. I'll just do it because I have to do it. Kids do that for going to school. Some kids do that for going to church. They go to church or they go to school because it's demanded of them, and so they go along, but they don't go along happily. So we spend our whole life like that. So it would actually be more valuable to, instead of having kindergarten change into first grade, is to just leave kindergarten for a few years. Let the kids play. And all we
Yeah.
have to do is just change the toys that they play with. We start giving them numbers and words to play with, instead of doll babies, and then we give them computers to play with. But if the child is continuing to play, he'll continue to learn happily, be curious.
Yeah.
There's, in fact, a
Uh,
great connection between curiosity and that feeling of anxiety or unsuredness. All you have to do is mix joy with it, because there's a lot of stuff
yeah.
that you're not sure about, and so we can become curious. And so by gladdening the mind, we're actually now adding the quality of curiosity so that we can investigate those feelings, that we're no longer controlled by them or run by them, but that we can take control of them through curiosity, through inspection. Oh, what is this? Aha, I see you. Now, what are you? Let's investigate this thing.
Mhm.
And that, all right, so that investigation is, in fact, the closest thing that we can say is a correct definition of one's right noble view. One's right noble view is to not come to a conclusion and be a know it all or a knowing something, into an investigator that keeps investigating. That there's very, very few truths that are noble in the sense that they're always there, they're all long lasting. Most truth is dependent upon circumstances, more like facts, and the facts change. But that does not mean that my conclusions change. Because I'm using an old set of facts, I've come to a conclusion, and that's how we wind up feeling, is based upon conclusions that we've already drawn about the feelings that we're having now, rather than a new investigation. And that
Mhm.
new investigation can take that very feeling of unsuredness, of not understanding what's going on, mixing it with joy, making it sweet, and to now it's a tool to be used to investigate. Aha, what is this? But along with that is also that change of attitude from being under it to being over it, to be
Mhm.
above these worldly feelings, to be above these worldly thoughts, rather than stuck in them. One student came up with the concept of you are the emperor of your own pile of dirt. The question is, are you going to be buried under that pile of dirt? Or are you going to sit on top of it? Your choice. And there's not a whole lot of digging your way out of it. It's just a matter of choosing, am I going to be buried under it or am I going to be on top of it? The answer is Anapanasati shows that I can be right on top of it. All I have to do is change my attitude.
Mhm.
Gladden, joy.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm starting to see more clearly like some of the concepts that I'm holding on to like really strongly, and like those that drive how I behave in the world basically, and like there's a bit of reluctance somewhere to let go of these and just be above them, but like intellectually I understand that this can be really liberating if I do let go of them. um, but yeah.
All right. Well, we're running around about an hour now, and you've already gotten some good insight. So next time we'll continue on our discussion of how Anapanasati works.
Mhm.
But I did want to leave you with the point that that skill of pity, that skill of being the champion, that skill of positive attitude,
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
being the emperor of your own pile of dirt. That's a feeling that needs to be developed because it's not well developed in most people.
Yeah.
That people who, even those who are very wealthy and have a lot of money, they only make a few deals a year. So they only get that really great blast a few times a year, and it doesn't last. doesn't last for 3 or 4 months. It only lasts just a day at best. But with the seeing that as a skill to be developed, the skill part of it is that you don't need it to be triggered by $1 million. It can be triggered with the thought, I can do this. I can come out of my stuff. In fact, if one would think about it, being free from your own suffering, being in charge of one's mind, being completely actualized human being is actually far more valuable than a big pile of money.
Yep.
And so success, I'm the best kind of human being there is. This is one of the ways of looking at it, that the Buddha talked about how high humanity can reach. That we become noble. All right. Well, the noble is one who is absolutely the owner, the winner. And so we need to develop that feeling, the feeling of being noble, the feeling of I can do this, the feeling of this is possible, and that the feeling that's of possibility is the possibility of success. Now, the next point is satisfaction. Satisfaction is also a state that needs to be developed, and satisfaction then is kind of like the end of that journey of anapanasati, is getting ourselves into a state of satisfaction, because from that perch, now we can really watch the feelings. So that's the way that anapanasati works. It goes from step 9, step 10, step 1, step 3, step 1, 2, and 3, along with step 5 and 6. That satisfaction is step 6. It's called sukha. Sukha is exactly the opposite of dukkha. That's satisfaction. Dukkha is unsatisfaction. So, and the way that we get satisfied is because of that feeling of being a winner. And we become satisfied with the fact that we can do it. Now, that's a really marvelous state to be in. It's called first jhana, and I'll describe it deeper next time. But your job now is clear, is to begin to change your attitude about the way you feel. And so you say, I can see you. I know that anxiety. I know that confusion. We're going to turn it into curiosity.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions?
No, I'm going to develop this attitude of success more. There's the success of seeing it, and then the success of coming out of it. So I have the success of coming out of it, and I can feel that whenever I do it, but I need to develop more the success of actually seeing it. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, call me in a few days and we'll continue on with this.
Okay. Sounds good.
Excellent. All righty. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
See you.